Morning, good afternoon, good evening. I've received a plea from one of the members in my WhatsApp group. Uh, as much as I respect the individual concerned, I've got to admit that she's not the only one. This issue of holding Nelson Chamisa to account has become such a divisive issue. But I think it's born out of the failure to understand what is going on here. Let's consider the facts. The MDC was formed in 1999 in answer to the people of Zimbabwe's cry for democratic change. They formed their party to take advantage of that. They even called their party that, Movement for Democratic Change. The people were desperate for democratic change, and that democratic change was all about how are we going to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections? The country had been independent since 1980, and it never ever held free, fair, and credible elections. And as long as Zanu PF remained in power, people realized that nothing would change. So the decision was, let's elect an opposition party or members who will push for the democratic reforms so that we have got free, fair, and credible elections. That was the primary purpose of the opposition. In other democratic countries like the UK, USA, and so forth, the opposition is held to account for holding the government of the day to account. That is their primary purpose. They are not expected to come up with policies, economic or political policies, for the simple reason that they are not in government, and therefore then they will not implement those policies. But as long as they remain the opposition, they are supposed to hold the government of the day to account. Yes, in Zimbabwe, the opposition was expected to carry out those functions as well. But their primary task in Zimbabwe since the late 1990s was to implement the democratic reforms to make sure that elections are free, fair, and credible. I don't know how anyone can explain that. That is what it is. So we've got to look at, since the 1990s, 1999 in fact, when MDC was launched, they've been on the political stage for the last 24 years. The question then is, if they implemented any democratic reforms? The answer has got to be no. Last year we held elections, and Zanu PF blatantly rigged those elections, clearly showing that if they had implemented the reforms, Zanu PF would not have been able to rig the elections. So we cannot sweep that under the carpet. And after 24 years of the opposition, it makes sense that people should hold them to account. But when you get comment like this, can clearly see that here is somebody who believes that this is when one says we must hold these people to account, they take it personally. They think it's personal. It is not personal. They are the main opposition. They should be held to account. What is wrong with that? This idea is not new. Indeed, we've gone through this several times. I have quoted this quotation. This is from David Coulthard's book, following the 2013 elections. And in it, he came to the conclusion that the electoral process was so flawed, so illegal, that the only logical step was to withdraw. We can argue whether he was right or not, but that was an assessment of what, based on the evidence before him. And I believe he was right. The evidence showed that the process is so flawed, so illegal, the only logical step to do was to withdraw. And he explains why MDCT and MDCN did not withdraw. They wanted to participate. They could not trust the other side to withdraw. And they knew that if that one side participate, they would win the seats in the in Parliament, the Senate, and so forth. And they wanted a share of those seats. That was the reason why they participated. So, in other words, they could not do what was the logical thing because of greed. There is a statement. I'm not the one who wrote that. Here is somebody else. In fact, in this particular case, here is an MDC Triple C leader who said that. Why should we not hold those people then to account and say, why didn't you withdraw? For some reason, when you do that, some people immediately think, oh, no, you're being personal. There's nothing personal there. Chamisa, David Coulthard, Tendai BT, Welshman, they were all in the GNU. They failed to implement even one token reform. It is imperative that the nation should hold them to account. That is what democracy is all about. And in this particular case, it is even more imperative that we hold them to account, because we realize also that these people have not done this once, they've done it again and again. Ever since the 2013 elections, the MDC Triple C leaders have participated in these flawed elections, knowing fully well that they are flawed, knowing fully well that by participating, they'll give Zanu PF legitimacy. They still went ahead for the same reason that David Coulthard is giving here, greed. How anyone can keep on thinking that this is personal. Why are you focused on Chamisa? Why don't you leave Chamisa alone? Why? Is Chamisa untouchable? Are we saying here Chamisa is not to be held to account for what he said? He was the leader of the main opposition in 2018 and 2023. Last year, he is the one who said, I have plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. And thus calling people to participate in those elections, only to give Zanu PF legitimacy. And now when we try to hold him to account, somebody says, oh no, you're being personal to him. You should leave Chamisa alone. The main problem we have actually with many Zimbabweans is that honestly they cannot understand why Chamisa is being held to account for failing to implement reforms. Even now, at this, with the benefit of hindsight, there are many people there who have no clue what the reforms are, how the reforms are to be implemented, who is to implement them. They have no clue that the primary purpose of the 2008 to 2018 GNU was to implement the democratic reforms. They have no clue that MDC leaders sold out. None. Even now, with the benefit of hindsight, they have no clue. When you do not have any clue what the reforms are, how they will be implemented, etc., etc., of course, it's natural that you should turn around and think, no, Chamisa and company are innocent. They did nothing wrong. This is just a case of somebody using their ignorance as an excuse for failing to hold Chamisa and company to account. The truth of the matter is, Zimbabwe is in a serious political mess. And we're not going to get out of it by pretending that everything is okay. No, everything is not okay. And in this particular case, the problem really lies with people who are failing to understand what we are talking about here. Democracy, the Greeks said, demands that the people should be educated, knowledgeable, and diligent. If you've given power to the people, which is what democracy is all about, after all, democracy is the government of the people, for the people, by the people. The democratic power to rule is invested in the people. They are the ones who elect the representatives. Well, they are the ones who hold the elected officials to account. But if you do not know what the issues are, how are you going to hold those elected officials to account? The Greeks, that long back, 2,500 years ago, were smart enough to appreciate the subtle differences between people. They realize that there are people out there with a strong mind who can discuss ideas, who can appreciate and comprehend what we are talking about here when we're talking of reforms, implementing reforms, how they should be implemented, etc., etc. But there are also other people who cannot reach that level. The average mind will discuss events. They can never discuss the ideas. And unfortunately, the weak mind can only discuss people. I think what we have in Zimbabwe is a very large pool of people with a weak mind who cannot understand that when we're talking of implementing the democratic reforms so that we have got free, fair, and credible elections, this had nothing to do with individuals. It was merely coincidental that the people elected Morgan Tsvangirai initially and now Chamisa when he succeeded him and entrusted him that task to implement the reforms. And so at the end of the 24 years, one has got to say if the individual and the group, MDC in this particular case, or Triple C, if they fulfilled the task we set for them, the idea was to implement reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. That was the idea. If they fulfilled it, the answer is no. Then you've got to accept that and accept the need for you to elect other opposition leaders who will implement those reforms. But when you've got a weak mind that can only look at the personality, you've got blind loyalty to Chamisa, you cannot accept that he failed to implement reforms, even if he clearly did fail. Then there's a problem. You're not supposed to be loyal to the individual, but loyal to the idea. In this particular case, to free, fair, and credible elections, the idea of good governance, the idea of the national good. It is, of course, in the national interest that we stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. How else are we going to get out of this mess? And to keep Chamisa in power and to keep on following him sheepishly, like sheep to the slaughter, is not in the national interest. People participated in last year's elections, even when they were warned that those elections were flawed. Zanu PF was rigging those elections. Still, they went ahead and participated. To what end and purpose? By participating, you gave Zanu PF legitimacy. And so now Zanu PF is in power, and we all know the consequences of that. The siege, the looting has continued. What is that? How has that saved the nation? People did not even understand. When Chamisa said, I've plugged all the vote tracking loopholes, they had no clue what he was talking about. Because if they did, they would have asked him, how have you plugged those vote rigging loopholes when we don't even have a verified voters roll? When Mugabe is able to frog march people to attend his rallies, but they just believed him. If he says he has plugged all the vote rigging loopholes, we believe him. And so they participated en masse. And after the election, they didn't even have the common sense to ask what happened. You promised us that you had plugged, we were going to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. Zanu PF rigged the elections. What happened here? But when you've got blind loyalty to an individual, what he stands for is irrelevant. Whether he delivers any of those things that you asked him to do is irrelevant. Well, the nation will also pay for being so inattentive. Nelson Chamisa is gearing to participate in the 2028 elections without even one token reform implemented. And the people who participate en masse, it will give Zanu PF legitimacy and we'll be back where we are today. 44 years after independence, and we still cannot run free, fair, and credible elections. That is the price you pay for having a weak mind. This is not about me picking on Chamisa. Why would I want to be jealous of him? Jealous about what? All I'm saying is the people elected Chamisa and his MDC friends to implement the democratic reforms, which after 24 years now, they failed to implement even one reform. If we want to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections, we have got to elect people who will focus on that so that those reforms are implemented. There were opportunities to implement those reforms, and those opportunities were wasted. Participating in an election process which you know is flawed, and which you know when you participate you're only giving legitimacy, is the most idiotic argument one can have. And it is equally idiotic when one makes that argument. Then you're accused of, oh, it must be because he hate Chamisa. Hate Chamisa? Why should I hate him? All I'm doing here is hold him to account. And I think the people of Zimbabwe have got to wake up to the political reality that Chamisa and company have been running with a povo hair for the last 24 years. Particularly post the GNU, they've been hunting with the Zanu PF hounds in broad daylight. It is no secret that MDC guys have been participating in these flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy out of greed. That is hunting with the Zanu PF hounds in broad daylight. And if you think saying that is tantamount to hating Chamisa, well, so be it. Trouble with some people is we can't deal with the truth. But we can't bury our heads in the sand without having to pay for it. And I think as a nation, this nation has paid enough. This insanity of participating in flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy must stop. That is the issue here. Let's have people who discuss ideas, who focus on the issues at stake, stopping Zanu PF rigging the elections so that we can have free, fair, and credible elections. That is the idea we want to discuss. This blind loyalty to an individual is, to say the least, foolish and should be dismissed with the contempt it rightly deserves. Thank you very much for listening, and have a good day.